Hi everyone, my name is Sylvain Lézé from the Department of Aeronautics at Imperial College London in the UK, and this is a new episode of the podcast Turbulence at the Exascale. If you're not familiar with the podcast, we are trying to gather the view of the scientific community, mainly in the UK, to see what are the challenges and opportunities associated with exascale computing, but also to talk about various aspects of high performance computing applied to turbulence simulation. So this podcast is part of the UK Turbulence Consortium and is also part of the ExCALIBUR initiative, which is a UK-led project over 5 years to make sure that the community is ready for the transition to exascale computing. So today we have a guest from the UK. His name is Rupert Ford. He's a computational scientist at the Hartree Centre, and if you don't know the Hartree Centre, he will talk a little bit about it. It's part of the Daresbury laboratory. Rupert has particular interest in portable performance, code generation, coupling systems. Is currently working a lot with the Met Office, and we'll be talking about that. Part of the ExCALIBUR project, but not only, is working on the next generation of weather and climate model, among other things. So good afternoon, Rupert.
Hi, Sylvain. Thanks for inviting me.
It's very nice to have you here. And for those who don't know you or who don't know you very well, please can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you are from, what you have studied, and any previous position before joining the Hartree Centre?
Yeah, of course. That's probably most people here who don't know me. I guess we'll start at the beginning. I was born in Nottingham in 1968, so I'm quite old. So I moved very quickly to Oxford, and I basically grew up in Oxford. And I went to local comprehensive schools there. The high school or upper school, as we used to call these things, was a school called Cheney School in Headington. Now, if any of you've been to Oxford Brookes University, it's just behind there. So that's where I kind of went and was did my O levels and A levels back then. And it was clear to me that that I was best at maths and physics. Really, they were my main things. And so I kind of did those at A level plus chemistry, which I wasn't very good at actually, but I had to do an extra thing as well. I think one thing that I remember back then, and we might kind of touch on a bit later, is that was around the time when they did they're doing the Joint European Tourists and at Culham, and I was very lucky to actually go and see the tokamak, and I actually stood inside it essentially because they hadn't finished building it, and so that was a pretty amazing thing, and maybe we'll get on to a little bit about how that's come full circle, and we might be working with them again. So that's one of my big memories. I applied for universities, and I was lucky to get onto a degree in physics in Manchester University. That was in '86, and that just kind of went as normal. I wasn't anything special or anything. I kind of enjoyed myself on the social side as well as the work side. And then at the end of that, I kind of wasn't sure what to do. So one option was to do a PhD, and I was quite interested in superconductivity actually. It was when that was around, and I was thinking that would be quite good. But actually, I ended up finding a conversion course into computer science, a master's course, which was also at Manchester University. So that was quite convenient for me. That might seem like it came out of the blue from physics, but actually at school, I was one of these people who was at the right time when personal computers started coming out. I had a ZX81. I kind of learned how to program on that. I had 1K of memory. And did basic. You ran out of space if you wrote more than one page worth of code. We're a bit bigger these days. And I actually got taught by someone, a friend of my parents worked for a company called Memotech. And they did RAM packs, which went on the back of these things, and a massive 64K you could get from them. So I'd had that history, and also I then got a BBC B afterwards, like a lot of people, and so I was quite a keen programmer. I liked computers. I think I liked the on-off right or wrong. It kind of fitted with my kind of physics and maths interest. Yeah, so there was that history. So it seemed to me a natural thing to do, and I was lucky to get onto that. So that was a 1-year conversion course, master's, half taught and half dissertation. And then kind of halfway through the taught part, for some reason, I don't know why, I was reading around, and I kind of found this thing about parallel computing being the future. And I kind of, for whatever reason, I don't know why, I just believed it. So I kind of got hooked at that sort of point. And then so I thought that for my dissertation, I kind of pushed to do this work on something called some transputers. I don't know if you remember transputers. You're probably too young so then. But they had one of those at the computer science department. It was called a TRAC, and I ended up doing an MD code, doing the Leonard-Jones potential and looking at phase transition. And I wrote in this language called Occam. Now, Occam is quite interesting because it actually had parallelism in the language back then already. It had this idea of seek and par. You could do things in parallel, and it had a priority. So what I did is I did par between the computation and communication, and then I did a priority on the comms. So back then you could overlap, and you could also do priority for communication. So that's kind of very early on, sort of doing the side of stuff that we do now. So that went well, and again, at the end of that, I just didn't really know what I was going to do, and luckily, I saw that there was a job advert for an RA, again in computer science at Manchester, seemed to never leave, and that was in a high performance software group, and they were going to do basically the stuff I felt like I was really interested in, this parallel computing stuff and new stuff. So I was really excited. I went for that, and I was lucky to get into there, and that was the beginning of a group called the Centre for Novel Computing, which lasted for quite a long time. And actually, at the same time, the funding for that group also started another group called SNARC at Southampton, and that was Tony Hay. He was he led that one, and he's the guy who started helped with the MPI standard. But also, it started, EPCC started from there as well. So they were already around, but they changed their name to EPCC at that point, I believe. So that was the start of quite a large centre for that as well. And so I've worked there for doing all the stuff I was interested in, high performance computing, did lots of interesting things. We were kind of primarily aimed at scale, what was called scalable shared memory back then. But you know, we did lots of interesting things. One, for example, might be I did some laminar flow, parallelization of laminar flow code with a guy called Professor Ian Pole in aeronautics, quite well-known guy. So that was really fun. And then around kind of 96, I was introduced to the Met Office on a project where they wanted to improve the portability of their code. And it was just running on a Cray at the time, and they used what was called automatic arrays, which you probably know of, and it didn't work on any other machines. So they wanted a way to do that. So I did my first bit of software, which was this thing I called LexCon. I should have called it Conman, which I thought was quite a much better name. And that was basically taking the Fortran code, writing C wrappers, mallocing what you needed, and then calling the subroutines afterwards. So it was kind of an intermediate layer. And they used that for a while. That was actually part of the system. And then I kind of carried on with projects with them. And I guess another notable success was, at the time, they were running on the YMP, Cray YMP, and they weren't getting good parallel scaling. And it's because they were doing microtasking. So they were doing low-level directives. And I put in high-level directives around the physics parameterizations. And that basically made the thing go a lot faster. Now, the reason it went faster was because they were getting lots and lots of bank conflicts, because they were synchronizing all the time. But by doing a higher level synchronization, it kind of, it let them offset. And so it got rid of all those, and it went quite a lot faster and got scaled quite well on the YMP and the C90 after that, before they went into MPP afterwards. Yeah, so after that, I did some more work on load balancing and things, but I guess the next notable thing was a project called Flume, which stands for Flexible, I'm having to look at it, Flexible Unified Model Environment. And that was the first time that they were thinking about how to change their code. They had their current model, it's called the unified model, it's still being used now. And they wanted to make it into something that is more flexible, more easier to maintain, those sort of things. So we had this really good, I say we, myself and a colleague, Graham Riley, we went and asked loads of scientists what they would like, and we kind of wrote a report of requirements and things. And that's when I started on coupling. So one of the interesting areas was coupling. And at the time, what they wanted, there didn't seem to be any software tools out there to do that. So we went ahead and started building our own. And that's where some software called BFG came along, which I wrote. And that was the first bit of software where I did code generation. So that was that was generating code wrappers around components and then allowing them to run in parallel or whatever on different resources. And that ended up being used by the Tyndall Centre, actually. So they had something called an integrated assessment model. And so that's basically taking a climate model and doing the economics and land use and putting those things together. Then, of course, you can then say, well, if the economy goes up, how does carbon go up, and how do we mitigate, and all those things. So it's that kind of earliest climate change analysis, and I think that's still being used there. So I guess that's one success. And then after that finished, then along came the Gung Ho project. So the Gung Ho project was the beginning of the Met Office really looking at their next generation model, and it was funding for Met Office plus NERC plus plus STFC, and we got some funding through the NERC side because they were funding academics and researchers, and we started working on that. And to be honest, by that time it was getting quite difficult for me to stay in Manchester because I've been an RA there or an RF or whatever for such a long time. And really, I didn't have a permanent position, so the opportunity came for me to move to Daresbury because they were doing the same thing. So in April 2012, I moved to Daresbury, and I basically carried on doing the same thing as I was doing, but in a different place. And then I've kind of been in the same group ever since, but I did move into the Hartree Centre. Around 2016, the whole group moved across actually at that point. Yeah, so I think that's probably brought us up to date, apart from the fact that I guess the Gung Ho project led to me working on this software called Cyclone. And Cyclone is the thing that I think we're probably going to talk about a bit in a minute. And that was really very interesting because it kind of brought different things together. I was in the right place at the right time, I think. But I'd done the code generation with BFG. I knew about kind of like HPC, and Cyclone kind of was the thing that kind of brought these things together and fulfilled a need in the project at the time. So yeah, I think that's probably a summary of where I'm up to now.
Great, thank you very much. That's very interesting to hear your where you started and where you are now. And before we talk a little bit more about Cyclone and all these things and your involvement in the ExCALIBUR project, can you briefly introduce the Hartree Centre for those who don't know this centre very well?
Sure. I thought you might ask that, and I've got some notes for that as well. So yeah, so the Hartree Centre, it has. I think its big difference to maybe an academic place is it has a focus on industry. Of course, academia does focus on industry as well, but it's primarily focused on industry. And as a result, I kind of guess the metric of success for the Hartree Centre at the high level is essentially economic growth. Now, you know, or GDP or whatever, that's the kind of thing we have to show that industry is doing better. And I guess that's slightly different to more research organizations where, you know, the research output will certainly help that, but it's not the direct line out of it. And so the centre itself is an HPC centre, so doing the kind of stuff that I do, but it's also artificial intelligence and machine learning, big data, and more recently, we've got involved in quantum computing as well. I say we, not me, but people there. And the sort of the type of people we work with, we've got a collaboration with UK EA, which is this thing I was talking about before, which is quite exciting. And that's just started recently. We've worked with maybe the Square Kilometre Array, and we've been involved in that. We have an agreement with Lawrence Livermore, so we have some quite big collaborations with big places. And we work with some of the big companies, so Unilever, Bentley, Rolls-Royce, those sort of things, and smaller ones as well. So an interesting one was Ocado. We worked with Ocado for a while, so that was quite fun. I say we; these are things that I've colleagues have done, but not necessarily me. And also kind of maybe you say more public sector. So Alderhay Hospital, been involved with them, and obviously Met Office, who are kind of on the edge of these things. And then maybe also smaller SMEs as well. So there's been a lot of funding to help small SMEs around, particularly around the Liverpool region. So that's a kind of summary of what of the sort of areas. And there are around 200 staff, I think, ish, and there are around 20 in our group. So we're a relatively large proportion, I guess. And the one thing I haven't said, of course, I should say, is actually the centre is a collaboration with IBM. So IBM are also there, and I think it's their only UK research centre, and that was kind of one of the reasons the government put some money in the first place, was to kind of bring that collaboration together as well. So hopefully that's a reasonable summary.
Great, thank you very much. Right, I think a nice way maybe to introduce your research and the software development that you are doing is maybe to tell us a little bit about your involvement with the ExCALIBUR project. Okay, sure. So ExCALIBUR itself, I'm not actually directly funded. So I'm directly funded on a number of projects, but the ExCALIBUR project itself, I'm not funded on, but I am an investigator on a couple of projects. One of those projects is called Marine Systems. So the Marine Systems project is about taking the Met Office ocean model suite and trying to get those to run on GPUs. So whilst you might say that's not exascale, I mean, a step towards exascale is to be able to run on not only CPUs but GPUs, and that's going to be true for a while. Their main model is something called NEMO. So NEMO is an ocean model that's well known, well used. The Met Office use it, but it's well used around the community in Europe as well. And so we've been using Cyclone to add directives to that code. Now, the interesting thing about this one is when we started talking to them, the way in which we do things in ELFRIC, which is the next generation weather model, the Met Office's next generation weather model for the atmosphere. That you need to write in a certain way, and we tried to convince the NEMO consortium that they should restructure their code, but they were not keen. Well, they just kept quiet when we kept saying, and they really didn't want to restructure their code. So what we did is we because actually they follow quite strong coding rules, we could actually take the code as it is, and then we could basically translate it into our system and then reason about it and add directives at appropriate places. So it's actually already an MPI code, this, but we're adding directives in so that it'll then also run on GPUs as well. And in the same sense, we can actually add OpenMP directives and get it to run with OpenMP as well as MPI. So that's the Marine Systems project. It's not just NEMO, it's also Medusa, which is another model, and NOC are involved with that. And also another model called NEMO-VAR, variational analysis, and Reading, along with the Met Office, are involved in that. And we've done a lot, it's been a lot of work with NVIDIA here. So NVIDIA have been very helpful in this. So that's that one.
We're also, the second one we're involved in is a cross-cutting theme, which is a tasking-based proposal, and we were awarded that, and that is with Durham, and what we're doing again is looking at the Met Office's next generation atmosphere model called ELFRIC, and that model. So what we do there is we're looking to add tasking style OpenMP directives rather than the usual ones. And the idea behind that is that you get more parallelism available, because you're not being so bulk synchronous, you're not doing lockstep, you're now firing off a load of tasks and saying to the runtime system, do those. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how well we do with that. We're not sure whether it's going to be a big benefit or not, but that's what we're going to investigate on our part. So they're the two ExCALIBUR projects that I'm involved in.
Great, thank you very much. So you've been talking a lot about Cyclone, and can you tell us a little bit more about this domain-specific language library?
Sure, I should probably. The reason it started was because of ELFRIC, and I should probably introduce ELFRIC first. Maybe that will give you a little bit
sure.
of background to it. So ELFRIC is the Met Office's next generation atmosphere model. And it's for both weather and climate. It's going to replace their current one, which is a unified model. And the reason they're replacing it is because their current one is a regular lat-long grid. And that's fine as long as you don't go to too high resolution. But at too high resolution, if you try and map a grid onto a sphere, as you probably know, you get very, very small grid spacings at the poles. And that just doesn't scale scientifically or numerically or indeed computationally. So so they went for this quasi-uniform approach, which is what ELFRIC is doing, and it's essentially you could take a different thing. It's called a cube sphere. Think of a Rubik's cube and blow it up into a circle. That's roughly what it is. Mm-hmm. And in order to be able to get the same properties, because you're now no longer orthogonal, to get the same properties, they went for a mixed finite element approach, and because of that, there's more computation, but actually you get the same properties as you would have as if you had a uniform mesh. So that's quite a neat situation. So that's the model itself, and while we were involved in this project doing this, one of the things that that we were asked to do in the Gung Ho project was to look at how we might future-proof the architecture, get it to be able to work on future architectures. And the idea that came out of that is this thing called a separation of concerns, which I guess has been used a lot in ExCALIBUR, those words. And the idea essentially is that you separate out what the scientist writes from the parallelization and the optimization. So if you separate those two things out, in theory, the scientists can then write their stuff and not worry about it. Of course, they do have to worry about it within algorithms and things, whether it scales or not, but not the kind of day-to-day correctness. And then hopefully a system of some sort will be able to add those things in, and that's what Cyclone does. What Cyclone does is it takes the science code from that and then automatically adds in distributed memory, halo exchanges, things like that, and also OpenMP or OpenACC type directives. One of the differences that we do take this domain-specific approach, as you mentioned. One of the differences between us and other systems is that we purposely stuck within Fortran, and other systems often say, you should use a different language, which, the reason we did that is because the Met Office wanted it, of course, but they have a large code base and they wanted to reuse some of that code base, which is all in Fortran. And of course, there's a lot of people are used to Fortran and the tools and etc. So it allowed them to continue. And I think one of the reasons we were accepted by the Met Office for a DSL, because it's very hard to convince, quite rightly, I think, an organization to take up a DSL, was that actually, if we kind of got run over by a bus or ran away and did something else, at the end of it, what Cyclone produces is Fortran code. So they could always take the output of it and work with that if they wanted to. So so that was very early on. That was a kind of a big point, a positive point for that. I think the second thing is that we don't, because my history is high performance computing. We don't try and automate the process of going from the code to an optimized parallel version. We allow the HPC expert to basically have a set of transformations that they can add in as a script, and it's almost like a power user. So an HPC power user, you can do it across the whole code, and it gives you much more power to do it that way. And then of course you do different scripts for different architectures. Basically, that's how you get performance portability. Is that enough about? I guess was one other thing. We do have another project, which I guess shows the flexibility of Cyclone. The Met Office are, so as well as doing their atmosphere model, they also have to do data assimilation. Now, data assimilation is getting the initial conditions, and then you translate those initial conditions into a form that's suitable to run in an atmosphere and ocean model. And that data assimilation process is a kind of an optimization process of mapping from one set of coordinates and values to another. And they do what's called 4D variation analysis on this. And in order to do that, they need to have a tangent linear version of their code and also an adjoint. And now I didn't know anything about this until recently because we've only just started the project a little while ago, but there are rules by which you can translate from a tangent linear model to an adjoint, apparently. So we've been looking to automate that in Cyclone because we can do code transformations. So we've just got to the stage now where we can parse some basic code, some kernel code that's tangent linear, check it's tangent linear and all those sort of things. And then we can translate that into the adjoint version. So that's quite an interesting thing. So Cyclone is not just about code generation, it can also potentially do code transformation as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting to hear. I have a few more questions. So you said that in the Hartree Centre, you're part of a group of 20 out of 200. And I was wondering, from your perspective, when I say yours, your colleagues and your research group as well, do you think that the community is ready for the transition to exascale computing, or do you think, I mean, of course, you are doing a lot of work, Cyclone with the Met Office, but do you think overall the community is going to be ready for the first exascale computers that we are going to have in 2022, 2023?
It's a hard question, isn't it? So you don't just mean us, you mean other communities as well? Or do you mean
you say, for example, you are working with the fusion community, so
yeah, okay.
Just well,
yeah. So I think both the fusion community and the weather and climate community, or at least the Met Office, have noticed early on that they're not ready, and they're putting in a lot of resources. The Met Office have their next NGMS, next generation modeling systems, and they're involved in ExCALIBUR, and of course, so our Cullum and the fusion work is also recognized this and is addressing this as well. So I'm not sure that they are necessarily representative because they are looking at it very much so. Even so, I mean, actually, I'll go back to what I know and think about the Met Office. It's okay for the atmosphere model to scale and whatever, but you do need the ocean model. You do need the data assimilation. You need all the processes involved in that. It's not just one thing, because if you get an exascale machine, maybe with some interesting architecture there, it's got to all of the codes have got to work well, and so that is quite a big task. And I think a lot of big organizations will struggle with that, and I think the Met Office will struggle, but they're trying to put the resources in to do that. As for other communities, well, the first thing perhaps I should say is I don't think most places will hit the exascale problem straight away, because you may have an exascale machine available, but most people don't run on the full machine. Okay, there's some heroic runs, of course, and we all know there are some types of codes which generally scale well, SPH or something like that. But as long as you scale to the size that you need it to, then you're okay. So I don't think necessarily people will have to worry about scaling to exascale immediately, even when exascale machines come along. That's not to say there's a problem, of course. There's a major problem. So I'm kind of skirting around the answer because I don't really know about other communities. I suspect some are very much ready and some really aren't. And I think some are going to really need new algorithms because their algorithms just won't scale. And maybe some don't actually necessarily need exascale. Maybe they're okay running a lot more jobs that are smaller, perhaps.
Great, thank you very much. So, I mean, you have been involved in high performance computing for quite some time now. Now you have been working with a lot of different hardware. And I was wondering if you are happy with the hardware you are working with, or if you have the opportunity, or if you had the opportunity to design your own hardware, what would you change? That is, you say, oh, this is really annoying to have those features. I would have wanted to have something different.
Am I allowed to change the laws of physics to do this? Or
well, probably
so
not.
If I can change the laws of physics, then I would make memory as fast as compute, because that's been one of the biggest changes, really, hasn't it, over the years? You know, the CPU, and I think perhaps I'd also make electrons and everything smaller as well, because then we can carry on with the free lunch and keep shrinking things. So that would be nice. But neither of those things are possible, of course. So I think practically, and I think this is what's happening already, and for the types of codes that I'm working with, they're pretty much memory bound. So you can obviously make them more towards the CPU end, but even when you change the algorithms, they're pretty much always memory bound. So I think the key thing is to improve memory bandwidth and latency where possible. And of course, that's why GPUs have done quite well, because they have a better throughput compared to CPUs typically. So I think that's probably the thing that I would think would make the biggest difference to the community.
Great, thank you. And I have one final question for you. I mean, you mentioned briefly at the start quantum computing, so maybe this will be part of your answer, but where do you see, I mean, we're talking a lot about exascale computers, and they are probably going to be based on a mix of CPUs and GPUs, but where do you think we will be doing our simulation in 20 years or even in 30 years? Do you think it's still going to be of some sort of CPU, GPUs, or do you think we are going to have to deal with a brand new generation of hardware, and which will require to rewrite everything?
I'm not sure I'm a good person to ask, because 10 years ago, I told everyone that GPUs were niche and they weren't going to be used by everybody. And now so perhaps, you know, you should ignore me, whatever I say. I can't, because I don't know what fundamentally is going on. I can't see beyond current technology, and I think in current technology, then we clearly we've been going down a kind of a specialization route. We've been going down more heterogeneity, more parallelism. I think that's going to continue. I think I can't really see beyond that. Nodes are going to get fatter. There's going to be more in them. I think an interesting thing that's happening is, of course, ARM might come along. I mean, we're kind of driven by commodity quite a lot, and power as well. So I think ARM is an interesting thing now. Their processors tend to be quite heterogeneous, and I think there's going to be more heterogeneity within a chip, and we might find that there are maybe you might have a tensor unit in there as well as a floating point unit, and maybe something else as well. And the question is can we make use of all of those things, or do we just make use of some of them and switch them off, or do we even go for specialist hardware for the domain? Can people actually have particular chips configured in certain ways for different domains? So that might happen. I would have said one potential thing is FPGAs, because that's the kind of natural route from the next thing on, is to say, okay, let's get rid of all the control logic, because that's quite costly, and let's just put things in FPGAs. But, you know, I'm going to make the same prediction I made about GPUs. Maybe I'm going to be wrong in 10 years, but I can't see them going mainstream, not from my current experience. And we've been in a project with that. I think that's difficult to, some areas, yes, but mainstream, I'm not convinced. So my concern is that the only way we're getting bigger is by more parallelism, and we're not going faster. So more parallelism and maybe more specialist units of some sort, making it more heterogeneous, which makes life harder. And I guess my flippant answer is I'm probably going to retire in 10 years. So maybe I don't care, but I can't see what's next. But that doesn't mean there isn't anything, of course. And of course, we mentioned quantum computing. There may it's being more general than when people might first thought, including me, of course. And it seems like it can do some things potentially, but I can't see that coming mainstream for quite a long time. Certainly not in the 10-year time frame. And I certainly wouldn't want to speculate in 20 years. I've no idea. So I haven't got an answer really, I'm afraid.
No, that was very interesting to have your opinion on that. So thank you very much. Well, thank you, Rupert, for your input, for your sharing your experience about high performance computing and about what you are doing with the Met Office. So we wish you all the best for the future, for this Cyclone library, for all the projects you are involved with. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvain. Good to talk.
Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this podcast. As usual, all the links will be made available on Twitter and on the UK Turbulence Consortium website. So if you don't know where to find us, just Google UK Turbulence and you will have the website and the Twitter account. So thank you very much for listening and hope to see you soon in a new episode of the podcast. Bye-bye.